speaker, his name is Jeffrey Ryan. He has more than 15 years of marketing and sales experience in the medical device industry. Prior to Interscope, Mr. Ryan earned his experience with Medtronic Surgical Technologies and Smith & Nephew Orthopedics in direct sales with increasing leadership roles. He earned several high accolades, including multiple President's Club Awards, Sales Excellence Awards, and Top Graduate. During this time, he was routinely selected for new product marketing launches and other business development opportunities. Before beginning his career in medical devices while attaining the rank of captain, Mr. Ryan served with distinction as a logistics readiness officer in the United States Air Force. Following recognition as a distinguished graduate, he was directly involved in operational execution in support of the global war on terrorism, in addition to serving overseas on multiple operations where he served as a foreign area officer. Mr. Ryan earned his BA from Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. With that, we'll let him go ahead and present his.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Ryan, Chief Executive and co-founder of Interscope Incorporated. I am excited to be with you today. Precision Medical Devices really put together a great panel and series of panels. So we're going to be talking a little bit today about the transition steps for medical device regulation as it pertains to the FDA. And I'm going to challenge you a little bit, make you think, is a pathway in Europe necessarily what it used to be? Or is a same pathway in the United States potentially in your favor or against what you plan to do for kind of the timeline you'd like to project? So with that, we'll kind of get in here. First, full-blown disclaimers. I am not a regulatory consultant. I've been personally responsible for Interscope's regulatory affairs for the last 9 years, but I have not spun out and gotten separate certifications as a regulatory consultant. So you get some good advice and real-world experience. But if you have any important matters for your business, please do consult a regulatory consultant unless you have a regulatory affairs specialist on staff. So we're going to talk today through some of the challenges that MDR is presenting. I'll talk a little bit about my product and help you understand how do we address this problem? How did the real-world evidence work for us? Talk through a little bit about the clinical evaluation plan and that's impact. Again, I'm going to tie back in every time to Interscope and EndoRotor and how that's worked. Pre-market clinical studies, as well as how you're conducting clinical trials moving forward. So those are things you want to really think about. With respect to MDR, the risk classifications have really changed. A lot of class 1 requirements now need a technical file. Didn't need to be there before. It needs its own clinical evaluation report. Also didn't need to be there. And class 1 is only the cusp, because once you get into 2A and 2B, as well as class 3 devices, the requirements continue to get stricter for the rules of equivalence that you want to adopt. Clinical data is really the game changer here. There have been, for those of you who are not familiar, the issues that caused the change that went to MDR were really a lack of companies who made efforts to get sound clinical data. And so really that's the positive spin out that MDR really brings to the table, is making sure we all do it. However, there's a level of stringency that comes with that you want to understand. So there's the players we have to think about. You've got the European Commission. Those are the folks that make the rules. And then you've got your notified bodies, your BSI, TUV, and any other notified body you may or may not have worked with. With respect to getting your ISO 1345 certificate, that's one focus. But now when you get to drill into, okay, how do I get my product to market? It's a bit different. If you don't, in the lack of clinical evidence, you got to deal with competent authorities. This wasn't really the case before. You generally, if you were a class 3 device, you would want to consider potentially having to do a pre-market evaluation with a competent authority. That's an in-country based study that you're going to focus on. Now that's actually going to be more the norm. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So just help you understand what we do. We make a endoscopic device. This is a microscopic debrider that we use in conjunction with flexible gastroscopes, primarily for gastroenterology, but we also use it in pulmonology procedures and a couple other ancillary procedures that we've been in development for. But we have our CE mark. We've been on the market in Europe for over 6 years, and we've been in the market in the United States for about 4 years. So we got a little bit of flavor for both these, and we'll be able to walk you through. What we have here, though, if you can see my cursor, is a powered console. This would be considered the active device, and our catheter on the MDR. These are things to consider. So we have an electrical component as well as the interface component that is inside the patient. So what are we doing with the device? We're essentially resecting or cutting tissue. We're retrieving it as well as collecting it at the back end. And that's done by a series of different instruments. Now, these, as you can see, are very basic. And for the most part, have very vanilla indications for use statements, in device retrieval or for taking out a stent, for example, of forceps or biopsy, very vanilla. With us, we're going in and we have a therapeutic device. So when you have a therapeutic device with a different series of indications, is something to want to think about. So let's talk about through that. Within a primary indication that we originally started working with was in the colon. So these are difficult lesions. These are primarily previously manipulated lesions, generally in the colon or duodenum or even the esophagus with a scar. So these are lesions that are incredibly difficult to remove. So how do you deal with this? The current standard of care before we came to market really was high morbidity associated with some of these procedures. You get a 24% risk for perforation, and doing an EMR, or endoscopic mucosal resection, on a previously manipulated lesion. Compared to with a naive lesion resection, you've got less than 1% risk. So you can see that it's a tough procedure. So this is a therapeutic device to the core. The other indication we're talking about is we got an indication for pancreatic necrosis. And that is, these are patients who are incredibly sick. The portions of their pancreas following acute pancreatitis has really eroded part of their pancreas to the point where it starts to die. And you have to go in and remove this tissue, or at least, in the very least, conduct a drainage procedure. And that drainage, which is first, allows this tissue to try drainage to a NOTES procedure, a natural orifice transluminal endoscopic surgery, allows us to drain into the stomach. But the solid stuff doesn't necessarily want to come out. We use a slightly different version of the instrument we make, and we go on and remove it. Again, it's two different indications, two different clinical applications that you really want to understand. Where do we fit in, assuming we're bringing this to the market today? So talking with MDD versus MDR, the clinical evaluation plan is really, something to think about with first-in-human studies, post-market clinical follow-up. These are the pieces that you have to really map from, beginning to end before you really bring your device to market. Now, on the clinical evaluation, you've got the basics, right? You've got a scientific literature search. That's a CER. There's been some transition points with that. But the CER really, in spite of the changes, doesn't make you make this decision. Is it right to go in Europe? Is it right to go in the United States? However, now the clinical evaluation requires results of clinical investigations on the device subject to the clinical evaluation. That's very, very different here. You didn't have that before. So now you have to consider other alternatives. The article does allow for use of currently available alternative treatments, but you really have to make a good story. And so we'll talk a little bit of how you would do that after the fact. But in any case, the use of scientific literature, you still have to have the data, which means pre-market clinical studies in Europe are now a thing of the future. With respect to equivalence and trying to play that story, you've got, with the FDA, we've got the 510K program. And in the 510K, you've got to mark a substantially equivalent device. Well, now the European version for the MDR and the use of equivalence has really stepped it up. They've allowed us to potentially use this as a solid means to bring a device in the market. If you have a device that offers new features to something that's currently on the market, and you have essentially a different mousetrap, then you might be able to utilize this. But for anyone who's considering bringing a novel device and something very different, you don't necessarily have a relationship with the previous manufacturer who brought another device to market, this is going to be an important clinical challenge that you're going to have to overcome in order to make sure you do a clinical study. So now in Annex 14, you've got some good talking points with respect to the sufficient access to the levels of data. Okay, so what that means is at least having equivalent data that you would normally have done in a post-market clinical follow-up before. And you're really having to improve. This is a robust change, the clinical data acquisition, before you consider bringing a device into Europe. So, the equivalence has to be shown in a medical device here. If partial equivalence is not acceptable, the FDA used to allow for reference devices as part of a 510K process, and you still can use them with an FDA submission. But you really you can't do that anymore. You can't do that here in Europe, and you can only use a predicate of something that's currently available in the market in Europe. Big foot stomp there. So if someone else decided to pursue a path in the United States, you can't double back and say that is your equivalent device that you're trying to map to. Very key distinction to pull away. You got to do your standard, your verification testing, your biocompatibility, making sure you've done all your bench testing and animal testing. None of that changes. And as long as you're doing that, you're putting yourself in the right position, but then you've got the follow-up, which wasn't there before. So now getting back to us, you've got your 510K here in the United States, which is pretty clear. Typical timeline for a straightforward 510K is anything from 90 to 120 days. FDA's, as far as the self-grading report that they've got with Congress, shows that they've got about 88% of 510Ks that are delivered in that time range. So there are some outliers for that additional 12%. The Denovo Pathway is another one which considering we'll talk briefly about, but I just want to help make sure we have full perspective. There's no clear predicate. You're not a PMA device, but you are not a 510K. So there's this middle ground. Now, there's been a lot more changes to this program in terms of the guidance documents that now allow you to say, okay, there is a timeline. There's no rating clock like there is for the 510K program with respect to Congress at this moment, but they at least have a solid guidance document. And on the PMA side, those are your equivalent class 3 devices that would be moving forward in Europe. But you've got two years for a PMA, up to a year on a de novo, and again, that 90 to 120 days. So which option would you pursue? Now, we're just reminded our device is a therapeutic device. It's for a novel device outside the box. First one we went with, you have it here. You have a 510K. I hope you guessed 510K, although I bet many of you guessed Denovo. So we want to think about that. The 510K process and the equivalent story was a very strong piece for us to map. Now, the same story in Europe actually would not necessarily have applied. Or if it did, we would have had to do some additional efforts, which we'll talk about, in order to achieve that. Now, with respect to just basics, let's just dial it back a little bit. You've got, again, the clinical investigation in Europe on MDR is of the device concerned. So you've got to make sure that you're doing a clinical study specifically on your device. Now, this means I can't pull a retrospective series together on something that's similar and say that's the data I'm going to use in order to submit. We really got to do it. The game has changed. Peer-reviewed scientific reports. That's very, very different here. Making sure you've not only done the data, acquired the data, done the research, but you've actually gotten published. That's very, very big difference than we had before. Now, fortunately, there's tons of journals. There's lots of opportunities to get your information out there, to get it picked up in publication and push out to the market. But those are the things we want to be thinking about. Now, respective of the clinical evaluation, you've got to do a regular analysis of the data that you both have and have acquired, and making sure the device risk-benefit profile is really crystal clear. That's part of the CER and what you'll be making sure you want to adopt for moving into MDR. Now, that clinical data and making sure that all this information is sufficient is one of the things that is, no matter what you do, it might not be enough. This is a little bit of how before the FDA came up with the pre-submission program of how it used to be. And so that transition, allowing the pre-sub program, has been a significant difference for U.S. medical device companies or companies wishing to market the devices in the United States. Now, on the clinical trial side, you've got to go in. Remember, if you recall earlier, I mentioned the competent authorities with respect to dealing with some of these pre-market trials. So now you got to get an approval from a competent authority to do a trial. We've done a phase, this would be considered phase 2 feasibility or phase 3 clinical study, depending on where you are in your development pipeline. But more or less, you are dealing with the competent authority. We've done one of those, working with BfArM, which is the German competent authority. It's the Germany FDA. And this is ahead of a full-blown commercialization. So you want to take that into your budgetary considerations, your schedule and timing. Again, how fast it can move. BfArM is for, as far as Germany goes, efficient, and you would hope it would be. But it still took about 6 to 9 months just to get the study approved by BfArM. A little bit of back and forth. That dialogue was not a linear path for us. So now this is something everybody has to contend with. You've still got to do the exhaustive preclinical. That's the animal work that you got to do just to show that it even makes sense to put this into a patient. Your biomechanical studies, having a robust risk profile, risk management SOP, as well as risk management execution. That's pari passu with the current 1345. So if you're going to Europe, you're going to have 1345. You're going to have risk management. You're going to have SOPs or need to develop SOPs for study design and statistical planning. So those things are there. Those are basic. But making sure you add all that before then having to do a pre-market with a competent authority is something you didn't think of before. So now when we say, okay, well, there's a couple other things to think about. We've got a class 2A device. You've got on class 2Bs and class Ds, there's a little bit more going on where you can pull in and talk to an expert panel, get a little bit of input before you go. That's what I mentioned with the pre-submission process as with the FDA. The FDA also, though, has the unique feature of the IDE, the Investigational Device Exemption. Now, indifferent for that same BfArM trial, I would have a BfArM trial where we had to pursue their clearance, followed by the study completion, followed by the broader European marketing clearance that we would have to do with that specific indication. In the FDA, we have an IDE here with a pretty well-defined timeline. Now, if you can make less than 2 turns on a protocol and the additional changes you have to do between the FDA's guidance, you're looking at 60 to 120 days. We got our first IDE approved in about 75 days, so we're a little bit above average. But going above that 120 isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means you need a little bit more education with the FDA and trying to help them understand what you're trying to accomplish. Or maybe there's just a challenge for your statistical analysis that needs to get a little bit more robust. So again, you've got an IDE proposition where you can pursue an IDE and then follow regulatory clearance in the United States following the completion of clinical trial, or you can do the same in Europe with a broader market there. Now, again, we've done both. We've done the pre-market with Europe and Germany. We've done the pre-market with the United States. So with the United States, we did an IDE in Barrett's esophagus. This is an indication where you've got patients who have an eroded esophageal lining that keeps healing back as the wrong kind of tissue. The esophagus starts to think it's stomach tissue, almost more or less. So this intestinal metaplasia can turn into cancer. The problem is you don't know who is going to, who is not. There's some indicators. So the standard of care is if it's a certain type, like high-grade dysplasia, they have to treat it. They generally will burn it out, or they'll try to freeze it out with cryo techniques. But the problem is the technique isn't foolproof. You get about a 20% risk for this to come back and repeatedly come back. Again, very well-defined space but no equivalent for endarotors. So where do we fit in? So we've done an IDE pathway on both our necrosectomy as well as our Barrett's. And the Barrett's, with respect to walled-off necrosis, the IDE was pivotal to making sure we focused to bring the broader market clearance. We were able to actually leverage European data for this, for the completion of the approval of the IDE. So the literature publication you see on the right, where my cursor is, that was a feasibility study that was done in Europe. And then we followed with the larger, more robust IDE, which included European centers and US centers. Now the game's changed a lot. Could we do this now, given some of the changes? The answer is probably not. Or if we wanted to, it would have been a lot more challenging, because now you've got this situation where the requirements in law are not necessarily harmonized. European Commission has set forth MDR. MDR is very similar to parts of the PMA and Denovo process, but with very stringent definitions on what you can and can't do. Now, in the United States, it still allows you to go ahead and treat patients overseas, present real-world data experiences. There are a lot of things that you're able to leverage that with MDR aren't necessarily there moving forward. And other things to think about when you're doing a clinical study are you've got to get a legal representative. That was not there before. You've got to make sure your monitors are not part of your company, which is definitely different than the previous MDD had allowed for. So these are just additional pieces. Some things worth noting is that the SAA reporting requires without delay. Usually, most trials you'll do 24 hours minimum for serious adverse event reporting with any given clinical trial. But you've got no delay. There's no stopgap for reporting a serious adverse event in EU. In the US, you've actually got a couple days at the top end, because you've got to get in, as part of your vigilance, a determination on whether or not there was a issue specifically to your device or to the procedure. And then you still got reporting requirements to the FDA. It's a little more up-tempo now in the European Union. Now, with respect to the process for doing this, you can do a competent authority, and any one member can be the main focal point, and you can bring in other centers. So doing multinational studies in Europe is completely on point, where if you feel that that's in your best interest as a business. But bridging the two between US and Europe is going to be a lot harder moving forward. As far as understanding a little bit about the data strategy, this is how you're getting your data. What is your statistical analysis review plan? You've got to really make sure that aligns to your competent authority as well as your notified body, and you got to work with them and get some feedback. This is the FDA pre-sub process, and that's but that is what you'll almost need to do. It's highly recommend for those of you who are on MDR already that you're pursuing this track and looking to consult with your notified body. The challenge is that nobody's beholden to the advice you give. You can get consultative advice, but it's not a guarantee that what the track you pursue will be accepted. So you have to take that in consideration as well. The FDA has a similar disclaimer. You can do a pre-submission meeting, and it does not give them any. They reserve the right to still reject anything that you submit post pre-submission process. So there's nothing binding. That feedback and that strategy, just making sure you're bringing working with your notified body is going to be key. Now, I just wanted to bring this in because we have done the Denovo Pathway. We've gone in and we used our study IDE for necrosis or removal of walled-off necrosis, and actually use that as spearhead the Denovo process. So the Denovo, combined with an IDE, effectively was roughly about, the IDE being the study itself, was just under 2 years for that whole completion process. You're looking at a similar pathway in Europe, but you can have, depending on the competent authority and the speed of that competent authority, things can change. So this is, again, something to think about. You can definitely, however, you've got the Denovo process with the FDA can allow for a business opportunity. Sure. The Denovo process is definitely has a little bit to be desired, but it also allows for the opportunity for businesses, whether in Europe or the United States, to really set the tempo by doing a de novo and setting specialized controls in your protocol. You really can set the game for anyone else wishing to pursue your indication. Now, the equivalence story still would play out under MDR, but you don't necessarily have that blocking piece of the specialized control that you have with the US. And it can be very effective for anyone who thinks, if you have a clear predicate in 510K, then 510K is your path. But if you don't, and you think maybe you just want to debate a little bit with the FDA on whether or not to move through a 510K process, you might want to consider the benefits of a de novo. Now let's say you're in the market. You've done the work. Pre-market work's done. You did your baseline feasibility study. Statistical analysis has been performed. You submitted to your notified body, and they've granted your CE mark for the indications that you wish to pursue. Now you've got post-market clinical follow-up. These are your registry studies. These are your retrospective analysis, user surveys. You've got a lot of different options that you can use. Now, the clinical data for these, for depending on the type of device you're doing, it just may not be sufficient to show performance and safety requirements that previous post-market surveillance used to allow for. You've got to make sure you're doing really robust work. And, here's a series that we did over in UK. This is pre-Brexit, but it just really, it highlights the fact that doing a strict study to an assigned protocol and assuring that the adherence to that protocol results in either achievement or failure of endpoints. And that can be done very well. But in a post-market clinical follow-up manner, that is something to continue to embrace. If you're already in Europe and you've already got your products on the market, you can't stop doing this. You've got to do this more. If you're thinking about it, you have to understand that whatever you're allocating for your budget for your initial feasibility work, you need to consider your post-market clinical follow-up series even more so. So that could be 1, 2, 3 additional studies depending on the types of indications that you're pursuing. If you got a single indication, maybe it's one study. Maybe you've got an economic benefit risk analysis study that you want to apply. At the end of the day, you have to take that away. Now, post-market clinical follow-up in terms of the MDR itself, again, this is an ongoing process. It's things that you will continually do, and you will proactively be collecting. Registries are great ways to do it. We've got multiple registries running right now, and I can tell you, seeing that data firsthand, just continuing to roll in, nothing's better for continuing to pull in and advance the clinical story that you're trying to present. You've other things to take in consideration with post-market clinical follow-up is the fact that you've got to do a report now. Now, you've got to get this, the report is really almost an annual thing. You can modify and do a little bit of outside the box, but you're within less than 2 years. Ideally, almost every year you're doing some update and iteration to the post-market clinical follow-up that you're doing. And we are, we're continuing to do it. We've got series in Europe as well as series in the United States where post-market clinical follow-up is very much a part of our strategy, and we won't really be pulling off that. But the key takeaway is that between pre-market clinical work and post-market clinical work, we really have to assess what's the right thing to do. So we've done really everything, right? We've done the de novo, we've done the 510K, we've done the CE. What's the best? You have to ask yourself this question and sit down with your regulatory affairs specialist to really assess, based off what you're trying to achieve, where you can get the most bang for your buck. So with that, I think this was a great opportunity. I really appreciate your attention. If you have any additional questions, we'll leave some email information after. And in any case, everyone have a great day, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a great presentation with a lot of information. I hope people can contact you after. I think you cover very important topics, especially for all of us that are in the medical device and the startup business. I don't know. I don't see any questions, Sam.
No, there are no questions. And yeah, I guess we can go to our next presenter, Dr. Simon. He'll be presenting on state-of-the-art surgical tools. So we'll head over there now.